Before the year of 1900, people scoffed at the idea of controlled sustained flight. In 1969, Neil Armstrong became the first man to walk on the moon. What caused this massive jump in technology and aeronautical engineering? The catalyst, the spark that started it all, can be explained by the 1903 Wright Flyer, created by the Wright brothers. The Wright Flyer's flights on December 17, 1903, in Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, and other subsequent discoveries altered the realms of warfare and commercial transportation forever, while introducing the entirely new idea of space travel. As recorded by the Library of Congress, Wilbur Wright was born on April 16, 1867, in Millville, Indiana. His brother, Orville Wright, was born 4 years later on August 19, 1871, in Dayton, Ohio. These were the men accredited with creating the first heavier-than-air powered flyer. In an interview with the Collier's Weekly on September 17, 1927, Jack T. Daniels, the man who took a picture of the first powered flight, explained the work ethic of these two men. He stated, "I never saw men so wrapped up in their work in my life. They had their whole heart and soul in what they were doing, and when they were working, we could come around and stand right over them, and they wouldn't pay any more attention to us than if we weren't there at all. After their day's work was over, they were different. Then they were the nicest fellows you ever saw and treated us fine." Prior to delving into the realm of flight, the Wright brothers had a more down-to-earth type of job. In an article called First Flight, the Library of Congress says that Wilbur and Orville Wright ran a shop in Dayton, Ohio, where they rented, sold, and manufactured bicycles. They became fascinated by the possibility of human flight in the 1890s, and they intensively studied the effects of air pressures on curved surfaces to determine the dynamics of flight. However, the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum explains that the Wright brothers' interest in flight was not a mere passing fancy. They did not begin to seriously study flight until they were prompted by the widely publicized fatal crash of famed glider pioneer Otto Lithenol. The Wright Flyer was the product of a sophisticated 4-year program of research and development conducted by Wilbur and Orville Wright beginning in 1899. After building and testing 3 full-size gliders, the Wright brothers believed that they were ready to test their first powered flyer by December 17, 1903. An article called Just the Facts, the 1903 Wright Flyer 1, thoroughly explains the material makeup and design of the first Wright Flyer. The Wrights used their proven canard biplane configuration, which was rooted in their initial 1899 kite design. Key to the Flyer's success was its 3-axis control system, which featured wing warping for lateral balance, a movable rudder, and an elevator for pitch control. The right wing was 4 inches longer than the left to compensate for the engine being heavier than and mounted to the right of the pilot. The Wrights refined the wings by covering the bottom surfaces with fabric. This resulted in a smoother overall wing surface, which enhanced its aerodynamic efficiency. The engine had no fuel pump, carburetor, or spark plugs, nor did it have a throttle. Yet the simple motor produced 12 horsepower, an acceptable margin above the Wrights' minimum requirement of 8 horsepower. After years of research and study, the Wright brothers were ready to make history. The record of Flight Day in Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, is most accurately depicted by Orville Wright's diary and his telegram to his father Milton Wright that day. In his diary, Orville wrote, "The machine would rise suddenly to about 10 feet, and then just as suddenly, on turning the rudder, dart for the ground. A sudden dart when about 100 feet from the end of the tracks ended the flight. Time about 12 seconds, not known exactly, as watch was not promptly stopped. The lever for throwing off the engine was broken, and the skid under the rudder was cracked." In a short, choppy telegram, Orville explained the day's events to his father. Success, 4 flights, Thursday morning, all against 21-mile wind. Started from level, with engine power alone. Average speed through air, 31 miles. Longest, 57 seconds. Informed press, home Christmas. Even after this first powered flight was made, the majority of people remained skeptical of the possibility and productivity of flight. In fact, when the Wright brothers wrote to the U.S., Great Britain, and France for a contract, they were turned down each time. The Wright brothers also refused to do exhibitions until a deal was made because they wanted to get a patent to protect their design. The article Politics and Patents on WrightBrothers.org states that on May 22, 1906, the Wright brothers got more good news. The United States of America formally granted patent number 821393 to the Wright brothers of Dayton, Ohio for a flying machine. With their hard work protected by a patent, the Wright brothers felt that they could safely demonstrate their invention in public. Once their invention did go public, though, the Wright brothers were constantly having to take copycats to court. From this point on, the technology of flight made major jumps because people were able to see with their own eyes the power of controlled, sustained flight. The U.S. was already using airplanes in the military just 10 years after the Wright flyers' first flight. In an article from the Imperial War Museum's website called "What Impact Did the First World War Have on Aircraft and Aerial Warfare?", the author explains how planes were used in World War I. The author states, "At the start of the First World War, aircraft like the BE-2 were primarily used for reconnaissance. Due to the static nature of trench warfare, aircraft were the only means of gathering information beyond enemy trenches, so they were essential for discovering where the enemy was based on what they were doing." By 1915, forward-firing machine guns were being fitted onto aircraft, but the real breakthrough came with the invention of an interrupter mechanism which allowed machine guns to fire through moving propeller blades. The History Cooperative website explains that aircraft in the military did not stop developing after World War I. By World War II, airplanes were thrust into the forefront of military operations. The advancements in design meant that there was a vast array of planes specifically suited to complete certain operations. They included fighter aircraft, bomber and attack aircraft, strategic and photo reconnaissance aircraft, seaplanes, and transport and utility aircraft. After World War II, the Air Force was eventually founded on September 18, 1947. Commercial air transport would become the other major market for aircraft technology along with military aviation. It would not become economically viable until the 1920s and 1930s, when long-distance travel became reasonably reliable, but efforts began in the pre-war period. The Smithsonian Air and Space Museum explains that the first commercial transport flight with an airplane took place on November 7, 1910, when Phil O. Parmalee carried 2 bolts of silk on his Wright Model B from Dayton to Columbus, Ohio. However, jump to today, an air cargo transports over $6 trillion worth of goods, accounting for approximately 35% of world trade by value. Additionally, 4.3 billion people travel by plane a year, as recorded in an article, Air Cargo Matters, on IATA.org. Finally, the invention of the airplane eventually led to the possibility of space travel. In the 50s and 60s, rocket technology continued to advance, and space was conquered by landing on the moon in 1969. The world's first power-driven, heavier-than-air machine in which man achieved controlled and sustained flight, invented and built by Wilbur and Orville Wright, had vast impacts on the world we live in today. By original scientific research, the Wright brothers discovered the principles of human flight as inventors, builders, and flyers. They not only further developed the airplane, taught man to fly, and opened the era of aviation, but they altered the realms of military, commercial transportation, and space travel forever. Without the first Wright flyer, the possibility of controlled, sustained flight would have remained an impossible dream. Their advancements have forever impacted the world that we live in today. The Wright flyer fluttered that fateful day on December 17, 1903, so that aviation could soar for the rest of time.